Okay, we are looking at the 1925-26 season. Yes, after taking yesterday off, we're back. And the standings are starting to look like, well, standings. The Ottawa Senators led the league that year, 24-8-4. The Senators were a dominant team back then. Montreal Maroons, 20 wins, 11 losses, 5 ties. Pittsburgh Pirates, that's right. The Pittsburgh Pirates, 19 wins, 16 losses, and 1 tie. Boston Bruins 17, 15, and 4. New York Americans. Isn't that weird that it wasn't the Rangers that was the first American team in the league? You would have thought it was. It wasn't. It was New York Americans. 12, 20, and 4. The Toronto Maple Leafs 12, 21, and 3. And the Montreal Canadiens, a very uncharacteristic 11, 24, and 1. Seeing Montreal at the bottom of the standings is strange at this point in time in history, and it won't last. This is a team that eventually is going to be very much talked about in this series because they win a lot of championships. The Hamilton Tigers players all moved to New York. So they went on strike. Frank Calder suspended them, decided not to let them play at all, and then they became the New York Americans. And as you can see, their record plummeted as the New York Americans. The Pirates were stalked by an amateur champion team called the Yellow Jackets. So the Pittsburgh Yellow Jackets basically were brought into the NHL, and it turned out to be kind of a good team. As you can see, they were better than Boston, New York, Toronto, and Montreal. New York having been Hamilton. In the West Coast League, what's interesting is Regina was moved to Portland due to low attendance. So that's why the Western Canadian or Western Canada League became the Western League, because you can't call it the Western Canada League when you got an American team in it. Although now, like the American Hockey League has Canadian teams, it doesn't really matter as much now. But I guess back then they're like, all right, we got to drop the Canada thing. Leading the league in goals, Nell Stewart had 34. Leading the league in assists, Frank Nybor with 15. Goaltender, the best goaltender, and this is an insane total. This is where you can tell that things like forward passing and blue lines and the way that we play the game now really wasn't being played back then. Alex Connell had 24 wins for the Senators. 15 of those wins were shutouts. So he had 15 shutouts in 36 games and a 1.12 goals against average. So when we talk about, these guys had these shutouts, look at how many games they played to get them. I mean, 15 shutouts out of 24 wins is insane. The Hart Trophy went to Nell Stewart. Even though Alex Connell got 15 shutouts, he didn't get the Hart Trophy. Lady Byng, Frank Nybor, ended up winning that again. Now, when we get on to the playoffs, we're still using the most goals wins between two games. Montreal, 3-1 winners of Game 1 against Pittsburgh. So it's Pittsburgh and the Montreal Maroons. Montreal ties Game 2 against Pittsburgh 3-3, meaning they win on total goals 6-4. In the finals, the NHL finals, Montreal and Ottawa tie in Game 1. Montreal wins Game 2 1-0. They win the series by winning the goals differential 2-1. It's a weird way to decide hockey. It's a really, really strange way to decide hockey when you think about it. And if anybody suggested it now, fans would go insane and say we're trying to emulate soccer and it'll never work and it's ridiculous. But that's how the NHL started out. So it's kind of a strange thing to look back on now. And now we get to the Stanley Cup. And it's a single series because, of course, the PCHA went out. So that whole PCHA, WCHL thing, gone, not a problem. Stanley Cup Finals. This was the Clint Benedict Finals. I'm sure Clint Benedict, watching what Alex Connell was doing with his former team, made him say, all right, that's fine. We'll see what happens come playoff time, boy. Because Clint Benedict was now the goaltender for the Montreal Maroons, which explains why the Maroons are 20-11-5. His numbers, I mean, I looked it over, and Clint Benedict's numbers towards the end of his time in Ottawa had dipped. So I can understand Ottawa replacing him, and clearly Alex Connell, the guy that replaced him, a 1.12 goals against average, is below minuscule. In those 36 games, I think they allowed 43 goals. Just picture that. And they were far and away above everybody else. This wasn't a matter of everybody had really low goals against. I think the highest though was 3 or 3.09 was the highest I saw a goaltender have from that standing. So yes, goal scoring was lower than it is now, but Ottawa's goals against was really insane. And yet in the finals, Clint Benedict stole the show. They win 3-0, 3-0. Victoria managed to win a game because Victoria, of course, is the defending Stanley Cup champion. They win game 3, 3-2, and then Montreal wins game 4, 2-0 to win the series in 4. And all 3 wins come via shutout for Clint Benedict. And 3 wins in the finals. That's the first time that's happened. And it shows just why, and now I understand that the Georges Vezina Trophy was awarded as the Georges Vezina Trophy due to the fact that he died chronically tragically of tuberculosis. And he tried to play. He tried to play through being ill. And he was, there are stories about how upset he was having to tell his teammates that he couldn't play for them anymore, and just how much that gutted him, and then he passed away a few months later. So that's awesome. It's, looking back at these stats and being a history hound like I am, I'm surprised they haven't named anything after Clint Benedict of some sort, some kind of an award here in the NHL somewhere, just to recognize this guy for the NHL's first 10 years was pretty darn good. Anyways, it was a short season by our standards, but this was the longest season they'd had yet. So the seasons are starting to get longer, and it is starting to look like the National Hockey League. It's starting to feel like the National Hockey League, and now we're up to 3 American teams. And things are going to get a little more crowded when we get into the 1926-27 season, and the NHL expands to 10 teams. So we've gone from 4 teams to 10 in a relatively short period of time. And what's interesting is, they went to 10 teams, and eventually they'd end up back down at 6. But there you go. The 1925-26 season, one of those rare times early on where we see both Toronto and Montreal residing at the bottom of the standings, while teams that are now gone, and the Americans are gone, Pittsburgh's gone, Montreal's gone, and this Ottawa Senators franchise would be moved shortly after this season. So the only teams that are still in the NHL that are on the board: Boston Bruins, Toronto St. Pat's / Maple Leafs, and the Montreal Canadiens. So there's more turmoil to come. But that's it for now. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Yes, the Montreal Maroons are your Stanley Cup champion for 1926. I'll talk to you again soon.